Okay, good morning, everybody, and welcome to this morning's webinar. Delighted to welcome you back to our Trust Insight series. Hope you're all keeping safe and well. As usual, if you can hear me, if you can see our holding screen, you might just pop onto the chat function, let us know that that's all working well at your side as well as it is on ours. I know at this stage, those of you who are logging back in on a recurring basis, you're really only here for the weekly or now the monthly weather update. So in Rathmines this morning, a bit grey, a bit overcast, and we've just had confirmation from Marina that it's also grey in Strasbourg in France. So this is a pan-European weather experience, although Elaine has let us know that it's sunny in Wicklow, so I think we should all just be relocating to Wicklow after level 3 ends. That's brilliant. So, morning, Mark. Good morning, Marie. Morning, Septa. Brilliant. Okay, you can all hear it. And Lorraine, update from Lorraine that Tullamore is also wet and grey. So that's great. I'm loving that everyone's getting in on the weather updates. This has become a key part of these webinars. Okay, so welcome to this morning's webinar where we're going to be talking about responding to employee feedback. So this idea of transforming data into tangible action. My name is FiveYear Strategy. I'm going to be your host for today. I'm joined by my colleague and CEO of Great Place to Work, Cathal Divley, as well as our expert panel. So we've got Catherine Noctor, who's the HR manager in PEI, and Elaine Quinlan, who's the group head of HR for Mainstream Renewable Power. We'll be doing their full introductions later on, but just to give you a sense who's joining us today. We've really decided to pivot the focus again, I suppose, as we head into the kind of the autumn winter part of our cycle. This is the busiest time of year for us. We've got a lot of organisations launching their surveys or receiving their feedback now at this stage. And what we're really beginning to see is while the COVID-19 is an ongoing piece, the employee experience, we haven't pressed pause on it. So it's really about how we continue to respond and create action on the back of these surveys and to ensure that we're continuing that listening mechanism from employees, and then we're kind of divulging that back and keeping that feedback loop going. We want to keep our focus as relevant as possible. We have set up a poll on our LinkedIn. I'll pop a link into the chat after this with a couple of topics that we could look at over the next few weeks and the next few webinars. So we really would encourage your votes for those, or give us a sense if there's something else that we're not capturing, and make sure to share it there with us. A little bit of housekeeping before we get going. So we will be wrapped up as usual within the hour. The recording will be available and a version of the slides will also follow. So if you're like me and a furious note scribbler, don't worry too much, the slides will follow. Participant questions are encouraged, so please pop them into the chat and pop them into the Q&A function. And let's get a really, really good discussion going this morning. Brilliant. Okay, I can see a good number of you here now. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Cathal Divley. So Cathal, over to you.
Thanks, FiveYear. Good morning, everyone. Hope you're all well and safe. So just like to take this opportunity actually to thank the Great Place to Work team for everything they've done since March. We've been working remotely, like many of you, since March, and it takes a lot of work to put on these webinars, and the team are really doing a great job. So just want to call that out, really appreciate it. And as FiveYear said, we're kind of shaping the content of these webinars around the needs of clients and what sort of areas you're interested in. And yeah, we've seen lots of interest in this morning's webinar around how you turn employee data into a tangible action plan. And look, I guess for the action plan to be effective, it needs to add value to the employee-company relationship. It needs to make sense to the business strategy. So how do you choose what areas to action? Who's involved in the action plan? What's the role of leaders in terms of the action planning process? They're just some of the questions that we look to kind of address over the next hour. And as FiveYear said, let's have a conversation. So please pop in your questions, comments, thoughts into the chat function, and yeah, we'll look to have as much of a conversation as we can. So first up we have Catherine Noctor from PEI. So Catherine's over 20 years experience in HR, working in retail, in hospitality and banking. Joined PEI over 4 years ago. PEI are a medical device distributor, and they have been a great place to work for 12 years now, and which is a fantastic achievement, but they also stay committed to the idea of improving the workplace experience. So not once did they decide over the 12 years, we've arrived, we're perfect, we're great, there's nothing more we need to do. They stay focused on that continuous improvement piece. And I've had the pleasure of partnering with PEI and witnessing firsthand Catherine and her leadership colleagues in terms of the sincerity they have towards their people and their culture and that continuous improvement mindset. So, Catherine, thank you very much for joining us, and delighted to hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Carl. I'll just get shared on the screen now. Hopefully all this will work. The joys of technology. And I presume that's up there now, is it?
Yeah, it's brilliant.
Okay. So yeah, PEI, as Carl said, is a medical device company. We've about 100 staff and we're based in Ballymount in Dublin. The business is a family business, so you know it has that interesting dimension to it. But there is a huge commitment to people. And I joined, as Carl said, 4 years ago. And prior to that, although I'd worked in HR for a long, long time, I hadn't worked with Great Places before. So when I arrived, it was wonderful to get all this feedback, and I looked at it and said, oh, this is amazing, this is great. And none of it's my fault, which is lovely, because when you're new, none of it's your fault. And then quickly realized that the survey we do the following year would actually would involve my input. So quickly had to realize how do we put this to work? How do we use it? So I suppose Carl had given some guidance as to what we should cover today. So I've tried to excuse me, track that. So I suppose the PEI approach to how we take the data and work it and actually put plans together and implement those plans is we look at the data, we look at the patterns, particularly something unexpected or unexplained. I think all of us know we make changes, we do things as a business that we need to do, and we know sometimes that will have an impact, or some people might not be quite happy with it, or if you're going through change, often you expect some impact on your Great Place to Work results. What I don't like is surprises. So if the results are predictable, that's something we can deal with. If it's the surprises, I suppose, that you really need to look at. And then we delve deeper. So the data is one-dimensional. It's a score of somebody's viewpoint on a particular day when they do the survey. We feel we need to get behind it, explore it, ask a lot of questions, and try and uncover what's driving the feedback. The questions, I suppose, there's a lot of questions, but they don't cover everything. So sometimes people use a particular question to put across a point that may not be quite clear from the data. So a big part of what we do initially is define the issue. So what is the problem? What's actually driving it? Where is this feedback coming from? And then we use that to create a plan. And we look at what actions we can put in. We put timelines around it and measurements. So we would always have a sort of a goal as to what we're going to achieve in our next survey the following year in that particular area, and then implement and review. Getting buy-in then, I suppose we found you really need to listen to people, really probe and ask questions and involve people both in defining the issue and creating the solution. If you don't go out and ask people and you just try and impose a solution, you're often trying to fix the wrong thing. Do what you say you will. Carl mentioned the commitment the PEI has to actually traveling with the Great Place to Work journey, and we find if you work on the results, if you genuinely want to use Great Place to Work to resolve issues, to make the place better to work for, then people will trust it and they'll give you honest feedback year after year. And then the communication of the overarching business strategy and the ambitions. I suppose sometimes people get lost in their own space within a business, and they don't understand the changes or what's happening or why things are being done a certain way. So it's to make sure that general understanding is there. And then acceptance and honesty that sometimes you can't make everybody happy, and the business may be traveling in a direction that some people aren't comfortable with. And I think that's something we've had to accept over the last few years as well, is that you have to accept and be honest that sometimes, people are not going to give you a positive score on a business decision you've made, and that's it's still the right decision. You need to still follow the strategy, and accept that you're going to maybe get some negative feedback as a result. Priorities then, how do we pick the things that we're going to deal with? So again, it's focused on what are the business goals for the year, what's the key factors that we're trying to drive for the year, what will have the most impact, and then the culture. PEI's culture is something that's treasured. but it's also always evolving and adjusting, and it's sort of looking at the existing culture, what tweaks we want to make, where we want to kind of drive the business and the organization. So we look at that and kind of decide what needs to be the priority. So it's always in the context of the business plans for the year, but also sometimes there's some very obvious ones come from the results. The first year I was there, Carl pointed out a couple of things that were very clearly needed attention. So sometimes that's very obvious, and sometimes you need to dig a bit deeper. What not to do. The graphic there is our behavioural standards. So PEI have 5 behaviour standards, which we really try and live by. And that feeds, I suppose, what not to do piece. So it's, you know, don't think you know the problem. As I say, we often jump to conclusions or think we understand what's wrong. Imposing solutions, again, if you just try and put a quick fix in, you may get a short bump, but ultimately it'll come back to bite you. And then one, I suppose, I learned very much on the first go was, you know, this punishing feedback. If you ask for information, if you ask people to tell you how they're feeling and what the issues are and what they like about a business, if they tell you something you don't like, it's very important to listen on honestly and openly, and not to sort of try and witch hunt or try and figure out. It's very tempting, particularly with the comments, to look through and try and figure out who's made them. So and we always go to the negative, but I suppose that's something I learned quickly. So just try to put through examples of some of the action plans we put in place. So that the year I started, the first results we got, one of the worrying pieces that we got was that the management team were less clear as to where the organization was going than the rest of the business. So clearly that was something that that was very concerning. The management team were obviously doing a very good job of convincing the rest of the business that they knew what they were doing, but they weren't sure. So that was an interesting piece of feedback. So we worked very hard over that year. We went out and we from a team base and from a bottom-up perspective, developed a whole new 5-year strategy. We got in external assistance with that. It was very much led by the business owners. And then the other piece to that was there'd been some work done on what we refer to as our higher purpose. So we're a medical device business. We work within that space. And there had been a higher purpose put in of changing people's lives. And interestingly enough, the teams weren't particularly comfortable with that because they felt that they weren't changing people's lives. It was our customers, the surgeons and the consultants who were changing people's lives, and they felt it was sort of overstepping. So we went back and looked at it again, and you'll see on slides that create better outcomes is the new sort of purpose that we have. So we're partnering with our customers to create better outcomes rather than feeling that we're doing it all ourselves. So it's an interesting, we have a lot of people who come from a clinical space working with us. So, you know, that piece of being comfortable with the messaging and the direction is really important. And from that, we came up with the ABCs. So there's 3 key parts to our strategy every year: ambition, which is growth, business development; better outcomes, which is about the customer, the patient, the end result; and then the connected team. So the people who actually make all of this happen. So all of our strategies and all of our plans for the year fit in under those 3 brackets. So that's our roadmap for 2021, which, as you can imagine, hasn't quite worked out the way we expected to, but yeah, that's the way we work our strategy now. So it's much more clear and much more comfortable. But from a position where the management team and even the rider team didn't have a clear view maybe of where the organization was going, we moved up to 93%, and the management team were 100% on that question the following year. So, you know, it's a measurement piece of knowing that you've actually achieved a result. A second example, again, in that year, and this was the piece that Carl pointed out to me the first year started, was, you know, this is the area that you have most need for improvement, which was the question about poor performance not being addressed. So we went out and I went out and asked a representative from each team to meet me. I think the fact that I was new in that as well maybe helped that year. And we collated the results and agreed all of the issues and then put a plan in place. And that plan involved performance management training for the management, but also for the employees. So we went out and went through the whole appraisal system with the employees, basically taught them how to make the best of their appraisals and their meetings, and did a whole lot of work around getting the most out of that system. We implemented PIPs, which hadn't been done for a number of years. through the meetings, it was very clear that there were some individuals maybe who it was evident that some people felt there were outliers in the business, so we needed to deal with them. We then put together a remuneration committee, which is myself, the head of finance, and one of the board members and one of the owners, to look at reward. Reward had been a very vague piece. Bonuses and everything just got paid as a standard. So we tried to make sure that we tailored the system to only reward good performance. And with that, we put a whole lot of accountability and measurement into performance management. So in 2017, we were at 45% for that question. And by 2018, we moved up to 72%. We had a good performance the following year on that as well. We have dipped a little bit last year, and it just shows you, if you take your eye off any of these things, as Carl said, it's a never-ending process. You know, that it can easily slide backward. So it's very much, you know, it's constant work, I suppose, on these areas. But it just shows when you put the work in, you can actually achieve an outcome. And then the other one, then another example is, I suppose, one team had a very different feedback. Now, I'll just try and see if this will work. So this was our departmental results in a year. And you can see we've loads of green, which is lovely. But there was one team that was very clearly not in line with the rest of the business. So we kind of said, we have to, obviously this is something that you can't ignore, we've got to deal with this. Sorry, I'm trying to get back to that slide again. So we went out then and we engaged. Well, I tried to engage with a cross-section of the team. I asked people to come and speak to me, and nobody did. So I went back out again, and eventually it got a group of people to come and speak to me. And we just sat down with them and we put the piece of paper on the table that I've just shown you there and said, look, you know, this is clearly, you're in a different place to the rest of the organization, and we need to figure out what that is. And in fairness, they engaged, and there was obviously, we were looking for common issues. So we were looking for the common pieces, and it was somewhat driven by a decision by the business to make a change that some of the team weren't comfortable with. So we had to establish what could change, and we were very honest then about what wasn't going to change for the teams. So what were the pieces that were fundamental to the plan for the business, and tried to bring people along the line with that. We did management coaching, we did some restructuring within the team as well. And we got an 11% increase in the score for the overall for the team in the year. So again, you know, it's not a massive, like it's a very positive bump, and it brought them back into a more positive space. But we're still working with that team now. But then there's the whole rest of the business. So we had a situation where one team were out of line. We didn't want to then ignore the rest of the business for the whole year while we didn't want to sacrifice the rest of the business to get that team up to speed. So we went out and kind of tried to create connections. So we did what we call PEI roadshows. So our business is very divisional. So we're across the whole island of Ireland, but we would have people in hospitals from different divisions that may not even know they all work for PEI. You could have somebody from orthopedics, vascular, and our respiratory division who could pass each other in a corridor in a hospital and not know that they worked for PEI. So we decided to try and fix that, and we went out and we did geographical roadshows. We brought everybody together in those geographies. We talked about the challenges each team had, the behaviour standards, communication, and all of that to try and improve it. We also did what we refer to again as a Japanese, it's a continuous improvement phase, and it means going to the work. So we did kind of exchange pieces where people who were in sales or in clinical or in service came in and sat with the internal teams. And where possible, our internal teams went out and spent time with their sales and clinical people to try and experience the other people's work and to exchange that information and to get an understanding of the challenges people have. And where we couldn't do it, so obviously we couldn't bring 50 people into a theatre, we did live streams. So we live streamed surgeries into the office here, so they were interesting. Some people were more enamored with them than others. Knee revision surgery is not pleasant, not close up. And then our CEO also went out and did ABC visits with teams that are remote, and went out and talked to them about the plans and the behaviour standards. And then this year, I suppose what came to light was employee development was something. We're a small company, family business, so the opportunities for development for career progression can be limited in an organisation like ours, and that has come through at a lower level, but this year it was something we decided to tackle. So we created an ambition project where we asked the entire organisation to come up with ideas for business and for development or for cost saving, anything that you could come up with for the business. And we did a sort of Dragon's Den light with marketing, HR, finance, and the CEO sat in on those. We were much more pleasant than Dragon's Den, but so we had a really interesting, we had about 50 ideas came forward, and 2 of them were actually put into action. And there's reward structures in place for the people who brought those ideas forward as well. Looking at people engaging in project work, and then there has been some team restructuring as a result of our last year's Great Place to Work. We have had one person managing a very big team, and it was clear that that team were feeling a little bit like they weren't getting the attention. So we've actually gone back, which I know a lot of people have gone out of, which we did a few years ago, but we've gone back to putting an extra layer in the business between that manager and some of the teams. So say we're constantly looking at what we can do, how we can change, looking at the results, but measuring what we do, and being very, very direct, I suppose, about what success looks like in those plans. But the other thing, as I say, is unfortunately, every year you start again, or fortunately, it keeps us in a job. Yeah, so you have to start again every single year, and you know it's a work in progress. So that's it for me. Thank you.
That's brilliant. Thanks so much, Catherine. There's a couple of questions which we might go to if you're up for that before we jump into Elaine's piece. One, there's an organisation who is actually going through a bit of strategy development themselves at the moment, and just wondering, was that a top-down piece? Was there a co-creation? Like, how did you go from maybe not having one to then having one and having that kind of vision within it?
Yeah. It was a blend, I suppose. What we did was we took each division was asked to create their own strategy, and we worked on it as a process. So they were given a kind of a particular format to follow, and they had regular check-ins with the MDs, because I suppose like that, there was a sense that they needed that regular check-in to ensure they were on the right track as they developed the strategy. So we did it over about 3 months, where each team created their own strategy for the next 5 years, and that was a team piece. So it was led by the sales directors or the division heads in each division, but they worked with their own teams to create it. And then finally we brought it together as a group. Each team presented their own ideas, and then we worked as the management team worked to create the overarching strategy then for the business. But it was something, I suppose, that was led by the business heads, but very much they engaged everybody and involved everybody in it. And we got some really interesting results in that. Like, one of our businesses has completely transformed in the last 3 years as a result of that process. So it is kind of, it's very much, it's a whole, like there's a lot involved in it, I suppose, but I think what we found, that balance between the team and then the regular check-ins and the kind of review of the process, that somebody wasn't coming at the end presenting a strategy that they created blind over a period of months without some kind of input from the senior team.
Yeah. No, it's brilliant. I think it's one of those things that we know organizations struggle with. Like, sometimes something's developed in a room by the senior team, and then it's kind of, here's our strategy. And it's a bit like, well, that's your strategy, but maybe not ours. So interesting to see that architecture, that it was kind of driven by team and then kind of umbrellaed when you brought everything together. So really, really interesting to hear about that. There is also one other question in, and again, it's a very, very common experience that we'd see across organizations, that performance management question comes out as one of the kind of the lower scoring areas, one of those areas to go after. And not everybody does. So just, I suppose, to commend you first off for going to one of the core issues. But they're asking specifically around, and they hadn't considered it, so training both the managers but also the employees. So it wasn't just how to deliver it, it's actually how to turn up and be part of that performance process. Just wondering if you could give us a bit more insight around what that training looked like.
Yeah, well, we actually used, we reviewed our appraisal document, and we kind of decided actually our appraisal document, it hadn't been that long since it had been updated, and it was quite fit for purpose, and it did both. So I think, you know, it was based, it starts with our behavioural standards. So the appraisal document looks at behavioural standards first, and then the practical tasks, KPIs, output, sales figures, you know. So we looked at the appraisal document and said, yeah, this is fit for purpose. It does what we wanted to do. And then we use the appraisal document to go out to the teams and sort of talk to them through the experience of having an appraisal, preparing. Nobody likes them. We're going through them at the moment. Everybody, even my own team, are like, oh, do I have to go out before? And it's, you know, it's just part of. I haven't come across anyone goes, yes, I'm delighted. This month is appraisals.
This week is appraisal week, yay!
Yeah, I haven't come across that yet. So, you know, it is tough, but I think what happens in a lot of organizations, it's something that's done to an employee in the sense they roll up, they have their appraisal, and they come out again and they feel like they weren't even part of it. So even things like we suggested, they create me folders that over the year, things that went well, things that didn't go so well, that they had a folder on their in Outlook that they threw everything into, so that when they got to the end of the year, they remembered what had happened. And then just kind of talked about feedback, about getting feedback, about giving feedback, because I think that's the thing as well that people struggle with, is that piece of receiving feedback can be difficult, but giving it as well. And particularly for employees to give feedback to a manager is very difficult. So we just tried to kind of create that confidence in people. So again, it was going through the document and sort of explaining to people what the purpose was, what we wanted from it. You know, the fact that this was their opportunity. You know, you rarely get an hour sitting down one-to-one with your manager where it's just about you. So to try and convince them that that's what it was, rather than a box ticking exercise or something that they had to endure. And you know, some people engage more than others, and I think it has worked, and people are seeing the appraisal as a less onerous piece. But again, as I said, that was 3 years ago. So, you know, you can see that we probably need to spend time on it again.
Yeah, it's that wonderful thing, isn't it? Constantly having to refresh and making sure it's relevant and keeping finger on the button on those kind of core ones. Yeah. Thanks so much for the candidness as well, because I think, you know, it is one of these tricky ones, and actually having to kind of keep on top of it and keep those conversations real for people is actually a big factor in that performance process. Cathal, I don't know, do you have any questions before we move on?
Yeah, I have 10 on appraisals. I'm joking. We all love appraisals. Thinking about the outlier function, Catherine, right? So, and every business has a function that is a bit of an outlier, right? For whatever reason. You said that you sort of spoke to them and there wasn't a lot coming back to begin with. Is there anything specifically that you did to get them to open up? Or I'm just thinking of companies out there who will be thinking, okay, I have a function like that. How do I get them to open?
I suppose it was kind of, there was an element of asking and then going back and saying, you know, if you don't come forward and talk to me, I'm going to come and get you. And the varying response that I heard back, kind of, you know, you hear back, oh, Catherine's really upset that nobody wants to talk to her. And then the other one, oh, Catherine's really angry because nobody came forward. So I said, no, I'm neither of those. It's fine. But just, yeah. So as I say, they did, you know, I think once they realized that it was something that had to happen, you know, that we weren't going to back off or to just ignore it. So that was the first thing. And then to say to them, look, you know, I do think the piece of paper that I showed there was really helpful, because, you know, there was no way you could get something like that and just pretend it wasn't happening. So to be able to show that to them and say to them, look, there's clearly something going on here, that you're not experiencing the organization in the way that everybody else is, and everybody else is actually in quite a good place. So, you know, not that there's, you know, there's something in your division that's not working, so let's try and fix it. And I suppose the fact that as business we do have a track record of actually making those changes and doing what needs to be done, they did eventually buy in. It just took a bit of prodding. And as I say, a determination that they knew that it wasn't going to go away.
Yeah. Thanks, Catherine.
That's brilliant. Thank you so much, Catherine, for that piece. And again, just to say thank you for your comments. It's also really useful, I think, for organizations to see the data. I think it really gives it that kind of tangible, okay, so when you put the work in, you hopefully see those results, and then the kind of recurring piece and keeping yourself accountable and honest to it, but also kind of keeping that live connection going. Really, really interesting to see. Okay, so we are going to move on. So I am delighted to welcome Elaine from Mainstream. So just to give you a little bit of context, Mainstream Renewable Power is an independent developer of utility scale wind and solar power assets with a global footprint. So the head office is based in Dublin, but they employ more than 300 staff across 5 continents, so quite a varied global reach. They started their Great Place to Work journey last year in 2019, and I've had the pleasure and the privilege of working with the team since then. So Elaine herself joined Mainstream in 2008. And she actually set up HR in Mainstream Renewable Power, so taking it from nothing to something. And that team has really been integral in supporting kind of establishing the offices and the recruitment of staff she says here, in 17 countries across 6 continents. So as Mainstream has kind of grown and contracted, she's been integral in kind of getting that going. Elaine and her team are responsible for providing that kind of comprehensive and commercially focused HR service. I was actually with Mainstream Renewable Power a few weeks ago, delivering this year's survey and culture audit results virtually to the global leadership team. And I suppose it's hard not to be struck by the work that they've committed to over the last 12 months, within which Elaine really has played a crucial role. And it was a great moment to see that work paying off in gains and scores across a kind of a number of those fundamental areas. And it was just a natural fit for this webinar. So enough for me. I am going to hand over to Elaine. So Elaine, over to you.
Thanks very much, FiveYear. And just a couple of the things that you mentioned there. When the company was set up in 2008, HR was one of the first hires that was made, and it's always been hugely supported at a senior level, and you'll see that coming through over the few slides here, and I think that makes a huge difference. We have a very different journey to Catherine. We just started this day last year. You presented our first set of results, so we don't have the 12 years of trial and error, but I suppose we had run employee engagement surveys over the years, and we had a lot of good information and a lot of good data, but we liked the trust model that Great Place to Work had, and we wanted to benchmark ourselves. So we wanted the hard evidence, I suppose, that, where do we fit with other organizations, and that was some of the driver that why we joined up with Great Place to Work in the first place. So we got our results last year. They weren't terrible by any means, but there was plenty to work on at the same time. And Fanny, you've been with us over the years, so you've seen some of the changes. The key thing for us in terms of the action plan was it needed to be grounded in what employees wanted. And so what I'm going to go through today isn't groundbreaking. It's very much back to the fundamentals and basics, but it was really about listening to what people were saying. So this is the high level slide that anybody who gets the survey done will see. And so, like I said last year, the results weren't terrible. It was our first year. We had the overall Great Place to Work 85% response rate of nearly 80%. But they did jump significantly over the year, and really that was the engagement we had with staff. And I think what we found over the years that staff were very open and frank and told us what they thought we needed to do. And so this is just a high level overview. If we go on to the next slide, I think this is a key one for us, and it's about putting it on the agenda. And from the CEO, it's on everybody's agenda, and it stays on everybody's agenda. So it's not a case of roll out the survey, put in an action plan, and then we'll come back next year. So, we do the survey, we got the results, the senior team get the results. We have an item agenda on the CSR committee, which is a quarterly subcommittee of the board. Employee engagement is on that, and our survey results are presented there. The results are shared with the board. And then senior team have their action plans. So any manager that gets their own report from the survey has an action plan, has a session with their team, and have an action plan that's monitored. So, you know, it's not put away on a shelf and come back to a year later. They present, I think initially the senior team, we will support the senior team and all managers who get a report to deliver the feedback and have sessions with their team if they want that. And then they put their action plan in place. So we have action plans at a manager level and a team level, and then we have the overall group kind of action plan. But it is reviewed and it's updated during the year. So I think 3 months in, HR set up a session and we talk to the managers to see how they're getting on. Do they need support from us? You know, where do they need support? And then it's also incorporated into performance management. So if there are areas that we feel we really need to make a change here, and Catherine mentioned this as well, you know, it has to be measured. So if we have an item that we say, look, this scored low, we need to get to, and we will put a metric against it. So we'll say we reach 70%, we want to see that at 80 next year. So it's very much monitored throughout the year, and we get support wherever we need it. So I think if we, move on to the next slide. So the first thing we did, you know, communication of the results. So obviously, FiveYear, you come in, you present the results to the senior team. But the next thing we do is we present all results. And funnily, we had one comment, well, we only present the good results. But everything goes up, like the slide that Catherine showed earlier. It's all there, warts and all, and everything gets presented. So, you know, we did that. And the Chief Operations Officer, Bart, presented those results with HR. And just, you know, we want to understand where some of the feedback is coming from. Some of it surprised us, some of it didn't, but it was a very open forum. And I think that really helped this, you know, town hall meeting. Everybody was encouraged, and, you know, people again were, like Catherine said, we're going to come after you. So everybody is asked to give their input, and we got a lot of very good feedback from the town hall meeting, and we put some structures in place, but we wanted to make sure we weren't missing anything, and that, you know, that there wasn't a cohort that thought, well, I can't really speak up here. So we decided that to make sure we were capturing the full sentiments, that we'd set up a session with Great Place to Work offsite. No senior team were at that. The HR team didn't attend. So we wanted to make sure that, you know, people felt that they could open up and air any issues that they felt we needed to address. So that was yourself, FiveYear, that ran that program. But I think what was helpful about that, the employees really liked it, but also there wasn't anything major lurking under the carpet that we had a big issue that we didn't know about. I think it reinforced, you know, what we had felt ourselves from the feedback, and we knew we were on the right track. Again, you know, employees were very open, and that's a very important piece for us, because, you know, now we know what we need to focus on, and having that level of constructive open feedback. It wasn't all pretty, but, you know, it was constructive, and, you know, here
people definitely weren't afraid to let their opinions be aired over that day,
which is great. And as well, you know, you have a few people that'll open up, and then that encourages everybody else. So, and there was no, you know, I think, you know, there was no concern that FiveYear was going to be calling up and telling me, well, he said that and she said that. You know, there was no concern.
I can't remember people's names that well anyway, so it was never going to be a problem.
It was so it was a very constructive session, we felt. And again, you know, it wasn't that we had some major issues that we needed to address. So one of the things that came out of that, we always felt that, you know, we're quite a flexible company. If somebody needed to work from home, they can work from home. You know, we're global, so people are traveling a lot. If you need to, you know, take the day if you had to work over the weekend, that was all done. But I think one thing that came out of the session with FiveYear was that, you know, we need a policy, because it's not applied consistently. So while, you know, well, I know he worked from home one day, but I'm not sure if I can work from home, and is it up to my manager if I can do it? So that was a very kind of easy one, really a good message for us to get, that we just needed to put a policy in place, and then it was, you know, it was there for everybody. So that was, you know, like I said, a very easy, an easy one for us to look at and address. If we just want to move on to the next slide, Fanny, I think. So a lot of the, I suppose, action points for us were around communications. And again, a kind of a light bulb moment. You know, Fanny, you mentioned we're headquartered in Dublin. We've got staff around the globe, and I travel a lot. I go and visit the offices. And what always strikes me when I, you know, walk into the office in Santiago or in Cape Town, there's a very clear group cohesion, and this is what we're here to deliver. And, you know, real team spirit and teamwork. And I think there's a perception that headquarters knows what's going on everywhere and is in the loop on everything. But what we found is that, you know, we were missing that cohesive piece in Dublin, because in Dublin, everybody's working on all areas of the business. So in South Africa, for example, you're really focused on delivering the projects in South Africa, whereas, you know, people in Dublin are supporting Vietnam, they're supporting the Philippines, South Africa, all of the regions. So we really need to put some focus on the Dublin team and where does Dublin team fit in all of this. So the first thing that we started doing were Dublin briefings. So we've always done company-wide briefings several times a year. We get everybody from all locations to dial in, and we do briefings. But each of their other regions do their own. So Chile will do their monthly briefing, South Africa will, but Dublin was kind of incorporated into the group piece. So what we needed to do was, you know, have some specific Dublin briefings that, you know, and already we had started doing that before FiveYear ran the session in December, and I think we were already getting good feedback that this was something that needed to happen. But again, the team put the agenda together. So, you know, what do we want to cover in these briefings? So some of them were items from the Great Place to Work results that we needed to address. And so they were action items that were put on the monthly agenda, and they were covered every month. So, you know, where are we on the flexible working policy? We've said we'll do it. So, you know, we updated on that until we closed it and published it in February. And then we were all at home full time anyway. So the 1 day
the ultimate flexible working. Yeah.
the 1 day a week that we were allowing in our flexible working policy, you know, changed. But I suppose the increase in the work-life balance score was significant this year. It went from, you know, the 50s, 60s to the 80s. But I think it's, you know, having the open conversations, you know, having the agenda directed by the team, and some of the, you know, some of the agenda items were what's happening in the rest of the business, what's changed, you know, what are we, sometimes we're working on something here and then we hear that it's changed. So, you know, we need to keep updated on those kind of things. We launched a company newsletter, which goes out now every week, and that's been a very popular initiative, and every region feeds into that. But again, it's around communication. So there was a big communications piece for us, and the work-life balance piece we've always struggled with. Again, you know, we're multinational, so we're on a lot of different time zones. There's a lot of travel, so that was one that we have struggled with. But I think the policy has helped. Obviously, people are now traveling again this year. And then we also rolled out an employee assistance program, so that we had done that in January. So we had a lot of things done before lockdown. And I think when FiveYear, when you came to present the results, we were concerned that, you know, we were hoping that we would get some bumps in the areas that we really went out to focus. So the communications piece, the piece about management, and I'll show some of the scores in a minute. But we thought, well, maybe some of the other areas will drop off. But what we found is that, you know, if you focus on the really key areas for employees, some of the other scores will automatically jump anyway, because they see the engagement and they see, you know, that we're trying our best. And So the first piece that I talked about on the communication side, a lot of that was driven by the senior team. So Bart and Mary were leading the comm sessions. They worked with HR on the flexible working policy and the employee engagement policy. And then the HR team took on an initiative around people management. So again, some of the scores, you know, referred back to my manager and engagement with managers. So we worked with the IMI and put together an Empowering People Managers training program, which had been in the diary for the last week of March and the first week of April. And of course, that wasn't going to happen. And we thought, you know, well, this is something we need to do in person because it's very interactive and there's role play and there's case studies and there's all of that. But we kept in touch with the IMI over the couple of months, and they had started rolling out a lot of their training online. And, you know, we said, well, look, we'll give it a go. And we did. And it really went wonderfully well. It was very engaging. We instead of doing 2 full days, we did 4 half days. And it worked so well, in fact, that we're now rolling it out to our APAC team because it's online. They don't need to be in Dublin to do it. So that worked really well. And we, you know, again, everybody was in lockdown, but this was a very interactive program over 4 days. And the feedback was very good on that. And then we also developed a new platform called You First. Very simple. We collaborated with managers and staff. We had platforms before to do some of this, but they were quite cumbersome. They were not that intuitive. And so we put a lot of work up front to develop this platform to make it very simple. We framed it around, you know, yes, no answers. And we found that it's been working quite well. Now, we've only launched it since July. So the feedback so far, you know, the initial feedback has been good, but really we'll need to see a couple of months in, is it working as well as we had hoped. So that's really going to have a focus on the engagement between manager and employee, but we've tried to make it as simple as we can. So these are some of the scores on the credibility questions. So we scored on each of the 5 elements. We had a jump in scores this year, but this was, I suppose, where we saw the biggest jump. And if you look at the statements, it really is around the communications piece. Do we trust the senior team? Do we know what's going on? Do we know what the strategy is? Again, Catherine mentioned that earlier. But across these 8 questions, we had an average increase of 27%. So I suppose, like I said at the start, there's no rocket science to what we've done, but it's very much engaging with the teams and hearing what, you know, they want us to do. And I mean, the results speak for themselves, really. Like I said, we had thought we might drop back on some of our scores, but that didn't happen. And I think we can put that down to, you know, managing of COVID. We ran the Great Place to Work COVID survey back in, I think it was June, and we got very good feedback on that one as well. So the last one that I just wanted to mention, we got a very low score in our facilities. So this was one that a group of employees took on. We set up a committee led by the office manager and the COO. Talk to staff, you know, what do you want us to do here? What do you want us to focus on? What are the priorities? And like I mentioned earlier, you know, Dublin is kind of the hub, but we don't develop projects in Ireland. And all of the exciting work is going on in the regions. And we wanted to bring some of that back into the office. So these were all white walls before, Féinia, the last time you were in the office.
Yeah,
so,
they were all white.
Yeah, so, you know, we've put our values up there on the wall. We've put up a map of where our projects are. If you move to the next slide, this is what you brings you into the reception when you come into the front of the office. So, you know, it's really just highlighting our values, our mission, our vision, because again, like Catherine said, we're all very busy on a day-to-day basis, and you know, this just brings it back what we're here. We have a very strong mission, a very strong vision, and this just puts it front and center for the team in Dublin that are supporting this in all the regions. So that was very much a team effort. So I suppose we had the leadership piece that that the COO, CEO led, and then we had some HR initiatives, and this was one that that the team themselves took on, and we had to stop in the middle of it because obviously we had to move out of the office, but that's a work in progress, and we'll pick it up again when we get back. And then really just to sum up, I think in terms of, you know, putting it on the agenda, leadership really getting involved and making it their priority and following up. So like I said, it's on the agenda. We have monthly briefings. Our next one is next week. And, you know, the same agenda is there, and the action points stay on the agenda until they've been closed out. So there's a constant loop back. And then I think obviously for every company, what's been front and center this year has been how we're managing COVID. We sent out another survey last week. This was before the Dublin restrictions came into place, but just to find out from the team, you know, what are their thoughts about going back? Do people want to go back? We haven't opened the office really since we left in March, but we want to get a feeling for, you know, are people comfortable to go back? Some people are dying to go back. Some people don't want to go back at all. So it's just to get a sense of that and plan that before we do anything. So I think that was me, FiveYear and Cathal.
That's brilliant, Elaine. Thank you so much. I think what's really come out from both is this kind of commitment to the architecture of change, right? So you were both very clear on senior team. These are the one or two things, and not doing everything, right? So here are the one or two things, what you took on as HR, and then what I suppose the kind of employee-led piece looked like. It's also, I mean, it's a little bit, you know, get something done and then close your office is clearly the way to to see some jump in scores. I suppose really quickly before we move on to questions, I'm actually delighted to announce for the first time officially to the whole Great Place to Work community that Mainstream Renewable Power have been certified this year again as a Great Place to Work. So we're delighted, Elaine, for you and the team to have seen the kind of commitment that you took and those action plans that you took in place, and then to see those scores increase year on year. It's been really gratifying to be kind of with you as part of that project. So congratulations on your
Thanks very much, FiveYear, and you know, the support we got from yourself and just some of the very practical helpful points have been great.
Yeah, and I think it is one of those things, right? So I remember doing those kind of sessions with employees, and it was we talk about it, right? Focusing on the fundamentals and getting those key cornerstones right. But it was communications. It was the Dublin team wanting to celebrate the projects that were happening globally, because sometimes there was this kind of, you know, rolling piece and they weren't sure where they were when they fitted into it. You've done a great job on that. And then that focus on career and what that kind of path might look like and what our internal expertise is. And you took it, right? You took on that feedback and you ran with it. So it's kind of really, really great to see that. Just to say, there's lots of congratulations coming in there, Elaine. So we've got Aoife and Lorraine and Anthony and Marina all wishing you congratulations.
Thanks very much. Done. And you're now to tell us how we maintain those scores.
Yeah, and here's the challenge for 2021, right? So we've seen this jump, and now it's, but you know, and I think this goes back to Catherine's piece earlier. This is about an ongoing and sustainable commitment to the culture. So, Cathal, I think you had a quick question for Elaine.
Yeah, just there's and congratulations, Elaine. Well done.
Thanks very much, Cathal. We're delighted.
So maybe a question is for Elaine and Catherine. So knowing that it's not about creating a wish list, right? So the data produces lots of areas and lots of potential areas to look at. How do you choose what not to action plan? Is there a lens that you put it through, or how do you decide on we're not going to work on this year?
Cathal coming in with the easy question at the end there.
I suppose it's back to that piece of what are the priorities for the business for the year, and if there's anything really coming out of the results that's dramatic. Like if there's nothing to, like this year, as I say, we didn't have anything massively dramatic. So we went back to look at sort of what had been a pattern over the last few years of kind of middle of the road that needed some work, and that was the employee development piece. But that fitted in with kind of the business plans and that for the year, because we were trying to grow and develop the business as well. So it sort of dovetailed. So it's about finding those pieces that fit with what the business plans are for the year for us. The things we don't, I suppose, address would be some of those things I talked about, that if we're in the middle of a change process, or there's something being implemented and there are scores reflecting that, we will acknowledge them and say to people, yes, we understand that you're feeling like this at the moment because we're going through something, but we're not going to make a big change or adjustment to our plan at the moment. We need to finish the plan through, and then we'll look at it again and see, next year. So it's about, I suppose, being committed to a plan, even if it's sort of having maybe, it's creating a bit of anxiety, which often happens if you're in the middle of a change.
Yeah, thanks, Catherine.
And on our side, Carl, I think it was the open forum that we had with the team to say, this is what we're going to focus on. And anything that came up in that forum that we said, look, we can't do everything, so we're going to leave that for now. But we have these monthly meetings, so let's get it back on the agenda once we've done the key priorities that people have said, this is what we really need to focus on. So I suppose it was acknowledging that, like you said, we can't do everything, but looking more so at the priorities, and then saying, look, these will come later. If it makes sense for them to come later, and there certainly may have been things we say, look, that's just not going to happen. It doesn't work for us, doesn't work for the business. But I think having that agenda on a monthly basis and everything that we're doing is on it, and it does get closed out. I think the other pieces can come back on the agenda if they need to.
Yeah, thanks for that. And you're both incredibly transparent about not hiding anything away, sharing the results as they are, and then calling it whether we're going to address it or we're not going to address it. Appreciate that.
Brilliant. So as we begin to wrap up, just kind of one thing to share with you. So something that PEI have developed is a new organisation called Testing Today, and they're actually providing support to organisations with kind of, as you can see, quality testing solutions, results tracking apps, access to healthcare professionals, and that kind of. It is personal protective equipment. My screen has cut off equipment, but it is equipment. And we're going to be following up with a kind of a brochure about where they are with that. So if anybody is interested in that, PI are the people to chat to. So we'll be following up with those details today. It is nearly 11 o'clock. So I suppose the first thing for me to do is to thank all of our participants here today. Thank you for your questions. Thank you, Cathal, for hosting today's session with me. And thank you in particular, Elaine and Catherine, for your candid approach, for the amount that you've shared with everybody, for not hiding the nasty bits either, right? So for going after, and for your ongoing commitment to Great Place to Work. It's been a pleasure to kind of work with both organisations, both in an early part of their journey and in that longer term journey. But it's always fantastic to see organisations like yourselves who really make that commitment, especially given the current context. So Carl, I'm going to hand over to you to wrap us up.
Yeah, so listen, just thank you. Yeah, I learned a lot. I took a lot of notes. I learned by writing, and I suppose, look, I've been doing this for a long while, but I actually took away lots of notes. So I don't know if that's a benchmark in terms of whether I learned something or not, but I've lots of takeaways from it. So I really appreciate your openness, your candidness, sharing your results. Was a great thing, and there's lots of great feedback coming in from people who joined us today. I just think today was a good demonstration of what we mean in terms of a community of practice when it comes to Great Place to Work. So two great workplaces sharing their stories. So thank you to everyone for joining us, and thanks to both speakers. Really appreciate it.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, everybody. Bye now. Bye. Bye-bye.